As you all know, I often talk to founders and business leaders who spend months building incredible products. But it's easy to forget how that one overlooked login or unsecured Wi-Fi connection can bring everything crashing down. That's where Nord Layer comes in. It's a business security platform built for the modern hybrid team. No hardware, no complicated rollout, just a simple toggle-ready solution that lets you secure your entire network in minutes. And it does this by combining VPN, access control and threat protection so your people can connect safely from any device and any network and anywhere. So whether you're 5 people or 500, you can scale it within a few clicks and sleep better knowing that your data's protected by the same team behind NordVPN. So if you've been putting off network security because it feels too technical or too expensive, don't wait any longer. Please visit nordlayer.com/techtalksdaily and use the coupon code TechDaily-28 for 28% off your plan. But now, on with today's show. What if change wasn't something you imposed, but something people actually wanted to adopt? Well, today I'm joined by Phil Gilbert. He's a former IBM executive and author of a new book called Irresistible Change. And that book aims to redefine transformation for the modern era. And he will explain why most organisational efforts fail, not because people resist, but because leaders don't make change valuable enough for people to embrace. So he's going to draw from his unique experience leading IBM's massive global transformation, and he will talk about how treating change like a premium product completely flips the adoption burden from employees to leadership. And we'll also talk about delighting teams instead of mandating behaviour, using peer-to-peer storytelling instead of fake corporate evangelism. And the result? Creating workplaces where people choose to return to. But enough scene setting from me. Let's get Phil onto the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi there, Neil. My name is Phil Gilbert. I have a consulting and speaking practice now, and I've just authored a new book, which is coming out, which will be out in November 2025. And primarily what I'm, I guess, best known for is I led IBM's massive transformation in the 2010s, which changed the way 400,000 people across 180 countries did their work, evaluated problems, and solved those problems.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you join me. Every day on this podcast, I say technology works best when it brings people together. And all my writing and podcast episodes all come back to the same thing, really, of keeping the human inside technology. And I think now more than ever, with everybody going mad for AI and there's so much excitement, so much hype, etc. And what I've seen throughout my IT career in the past is any new technology comes along, people spend too long on the shiny technology and not enough on the culture required to make it work. So if the culture change isn't right in the organisation, very often it will fail. And the reason I say this is when I was doing a little research on you, I read that you said that that most change efforts fail because they ignore culture. So you speak my language, but why do you think organisations still default to mandates rather than earning buy-in from the outset?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and we still see today. There historically 7 of 8 big transformations have failed, and we're seeing the identical thing play out again with AI. All of the reports are coming out saying 90%, 95% of the AI transformations are failing, and it's for the very reason that you identified. Why do people do it? Because I think a lot of people default to what you can count. You can count how many tools you buy. You can count how many people show up for training. It's much harder to understand how those tools are adopted and whether people change their behaviors. And so I think that's the primary issue is people tend to count what's easy to count, and they call success way too early. Typically, they call success when something's actually just starting. So we approached it very differently at IBM. we did a couple of things that were, I think, very unique. The first is we didn't mandate anybody change at all. And what me and my team took on was the responsibility to make the changes so profoundly valuable to the individuals and the teams that they would choose to adopt them. And I leaned back on my almost, at the time, 3 decades of experience running startups, and it occurred to me that running a change program is the same thing, the same problem is in front of you that startups have, which is, how do I get people that don't know about me to not only learn about me, but also choose to adopt me in the face of an organization and inertia that rewards the status quo? We had to rethink of change as a product, as a premium product, and we had to think about our users, the marketplace, in this case, which was the 400,000 people inside of IBM as a marketplace. And I had to build a product that was so compelling, not only that they would choose to use it, but after the first year, they actually paid for the privilege.
And in your book, Irresistible Change, that you mentioned in your intro there, one of the things that stood out to me when looking at it was you described treating transformation like a startup and selling it like a product. So how does that mindset shift, or how does that mindset shift the way that leaders should approach internal change? What did you find here?
Yeah, so we very much did that. And as we think about product experiences, we started thinking about, okay, every experience that somebody has with, in this case, the program, the change program leadership team, and with the new tools and the new practices, the new methods that we put in place, every single one of those had to be delightful. And so we had to make it really empowering and wonderful, delightful to begin using the new methods and tools. And then we had to have a support system in place so that when they needed help in those early days of doing things in a very new way, there was a support system that was in place that, again, delighted them with how we responded and how easy it was to get support. And it wasn't judgment-oriented. We also had to make sure that the way that the organization measured our success was very, very different. It wasn't about training, and it wasn't about butts in seats. And so we rethought about how we introduced change into the organization. And as we thought through that, most transformations, they'll hold training sessions for, they'll get 1,000 people in a room and teach you how to use chatbots, or put you onto an online website and have people do that, and you complete the course and you get a badge or whatever. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't actually reinforce the use of those tools. It doesn't reinforce and help the end user with the adoption of those tools. And more destructively, as you focus on the individual, you actually aren't focusing on the unit that delivers outcomes to the marketplace. It's only teams that do that. And so one of the first things we did is we said, we're not going to deal with anybody with respect to our transformation except for teams. And these had to be teams that were funded teams, regular old teams inside the business. And the team became the atomic unit of our change program. And as you pulled a team into the program, you gave them a great experience. You also pulled their line executives all the way, in our case, up to our CEO. They came into the program. And for each of those 3 user personas, the teams, the middle managers, and the senior executives, we had very distinct touch points to our product of change.
And during your time at IBM, I think I should highlight this, you led one of the largest cultural transformations in corporate history. So having that under your belt and so much experience, I've got to ask, what were the first signs that your approach was working and that people were running towards change instead of resisting it or running away from it? What signs did you see there?
Yeah, a great question. So we were very intentional about, we had the capacity in the first year to work with just 7 teams. Now, mind you, at IBM, at any given time, we reckoned that there were somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 teams delivering stuff. We worked with just 7 the first year. And we spent an inordinate amount of time of bringing them into the program and then working with them as they left that first week of onboarding boot camp and kind of went back into the real world. We spent a ton of time learning where all of the systems and the people of the old organization were thwarting their adoption. So that happened, and we got tremendous reviews, and there were some communications strategies that we adopted around those first teams so that they became the people telling the stories of change that they were experiencing and how it was helping them in their work and their worlds. And after just about the 6th month, right after we had gotten onboarded that 7th team, we started getting incoming queries from teams all around the organization. And in fact, by the end of the 7th or 8th month, we had a backlog of about 40 or 50 teams that wanted in our program the following year. And at that time, we knew we would only be able to probably get to 25 or 30 teams that second year. So we were oversubscribed for our second year a year in advance.
And over the last few years, I think we've seen many leaders struggle with things like return to office plans. Then we have AI rollouts, and many have stuck in testing or development and not making it out of pilot phase into production. So how can they apply this model that you're talking about here to make these initiatives feel more authentic and ultimately more desirable rather than imposed upon?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think return to office has been hugely mismanaged. And I'm seeing, as I said earlier, the AI rollouts, many of them are hugely mismanaged because, again, the people need to find value in what you're delivering.
Yeah.
If you have to mandate something, there's one of two problems exists. Either the thing you're mandating and forcing people to do is actually not useful in the real world. It's just not useful. And the people know it and they resist it. And so you have to mandate it. Or you think you do. The second reason, though, and what is I find to be more often the case, is the idea is actually a good one, but you haven't convinced your employees of the value to them. Return to office is a great example of, I think, this notion of collaboration and what have you falls on its face when people go back into the office supposedly for collaboration, and many of their teammates or most of their teammates aren't even in that office to begin with. They're in some other office. So why do I have to be in this office for collaboration? I've come to call that kind of collaboration what I call transactional collaboration. And it's actually, if a team is together and they're executing on a project, Zoom or Teams or any of these online technologies are probably just fine and maybe even better for that kind of transactional collaboration. We're all aligned around a common mission. We just have to get together to make sure that we accelerate that as quickly as possible. What I find offices are most valuable for are everything else at work, and they're hugely valuable. I'm a huge proponent of people being back at the office, but I think most of the management has not done a good job of thinking about, from a product perspective, my office is something, if you're not coming to, I have to figure out why that is. I have to make sure that your experience in our physical spaces is adding so much value to your life that you choose to be there. And I think, again, this notion of thinking about any of these initiatives, RTO, AI, Agile, whatever it might be, if you think about these from a product perspective, it shifts the onus of adoption onto the deliverer of the service and not to the person using the service. Mm. In the same way that if we build a product and people don't buy it, it's very easy to say, well, they just don't get it. But the fact is you're out of business. They didn't buy it. So a great product person figures out, why aren't you buying my product? What do I need to do to make it more useful to you and to make it more desirable to you? If we had that attitude for transformations and for return to office and all of these other initiatives, I think we would accelerate our organizations greatly into this new world.
And one of the things I love about what you're talking about here is that word value and proving the value of change instead of just evangelizing its benefits. But I'm curious, are you able to share a practical example of what that looks like in action, maybe a real world example? You don't have to mention any names, but any examples you could share there?
Well, I'll give you a very specific example that I write about in the book, which was one of our early teams that came into the change program at IBM. And by the way, when they showed up at 8:00 on Monday morning, if you will, a lot of these folks had not been in the same room together at all. They were from different places around the world. But I would walk in, and the promise I made the team first thing Monday morning was, if on Friday when you leave, you haven't seen something like a 10x improvement in where your project would be after a week, you should go back to your old ways of working. You should, and you'll never hear from us again. Now, that never happened, obviously, because in fact, over the course of that week, the tangible benefits, the actual benefits to that team's work was dramatically improved. And we got one statement at the end of the session on the Friday of one of the very senior engineers on the team at the time, who had shown up fairly skeptical. And on the Friday, he said, had we been using these practices 6 months ago when we started working on this next release, we would have probably saved 100 person years of engineering.
Wow.
So those are the kinds of ways that you can communicate value. The first is by promising that if you're not adding value, you can go back to your old thing. So you're giving people agency. And now they're assessing on their own, am I getting value from this? And people are pretty good, BS detectors. Yeah. And if at the end of that week you haven't added a ton of value, they'll tell you and you'll know it. But the fact is, even though it was somewhat intangible, everybody felt, the hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands of people that went into this program all felt that they were personally benefiting from it. And then there was the more kind of quantifiable value props of the 100 person years in that one case that we would also capture and communicate and let people know.
And when we're talking about culture inside of an organization, it's often described as something that can take years to build, but literally only seconds to lose. So how do you maintain momentum and also protect cultural progress across a company, especially when we're talking about a company the size of IBM? I would imagine it's a huge balancing act.
It is a huge balancing act. And it's why I say that, our strategy around communications was probably 50% of our reason for success. And there were a couple of things that we did. First of all, it requires constant updating of the senior leadership of where their teams are and how the program is growing in its impact across the organization and inside their organizations. So tactically, what I'm talking about is I would have quarterly one-on-ones with every general manager, every senior vice president, and the CEO, and scoping the conversation to their world, to their organization. I would let them know, this quarter, this is how many teams, these were the outputs, these are the change behaviors, these are the people that are misbehaving, these are the people that are behaving well. I would also engage them in the operational reinforcement of people that were particularly standouts. And I would actually pre-draft emails so that those senior leaders could send emails directly to people sometimes, maybe fresh out of university, but that are really displaying great progress in this journey. So now all of a sudden your very senior executives are constantly updated and they're constantly engaged with the teams that are changing, and they're seeing the footprint grow. We in the early days, I spent some amount of time trying to figure out what a culture is and how I could think about scaling something to a culture as deep, over 100 years old, as IBM was, and as broad as it was, 400,000 people, 180 countries. And I spent quite a bit of time, because I'm a huge believer that it's cultures that deliver outcomes, right? Everybody knows the culture eats strategy for breakfast, all these trite sayings, but they're all true. And culture is what drives outcomes. And tools are a part of that. But I started thinking about how would an archaeologist go in and try to assess some ancient civilization? And long story short, I came up with this formula that a culture is made up of its people and the attributes of its people, the mindsets, the skills of its people, the practices and tools that the people use and that the people build, and the places where they do their work and live their lives. And this notion of people plus practices plus places equals culture, and therefore people plus practices plus places equals outcomes. That became our formula. And on my leadership team of the change program, every single one of the people on my leadership team had rolling goals every 6 months, but all of those people had to have some aspect of their work had to think about, what am I going to change in people this 6 months? What am I going to change in the practices and tools this 6 months? And how am I going to impact the places where we do that work over the next 6 months? And that really became a concrete way that we could show expanding footprint, expanding the number of people, expanding the skills that our people had, the evolution of the tooling that we were using, and the evolution of the practices the methods that we were bringing to bear, and finally, what was happening with our places to support all of this new culture. Because places are usually a forgotten part of the reinforcement mechanism for any kind of culture. So that's how we did it. We had a communications program where we were constantly having bespoke one-on-one meetings with all of the people who mattered. And we had this formula around which each of those people, they embraced the formula and they could see how within their organizations that formula was scaling over time.
And you've also emphasized the need to navigate an empowered and yet skeptical workforce. And that line alone will have leaders nodding in agreement all around the world. So what advice would you give to those leaders listening that are trying to earn trust and autonomy from employees who have seen countless transformations come and go? They've seen it all before, or think they have. What's going to make this one different? What advice would you give to those leaders?
Well, I think the main thing, the way we told our story, I pretty much forbid any of my team to do any evangelism. We didn't go around doing evangelism. We, as I said earlier, on the Friday, the way we pretty much told our story was by the people that were actually on the teams that were undergoing the change. And we let them tell the story. We would get them on video, and we had our own spot on the company's intranet. And every Monday after one of these boot camps, there was a new sizzle reel of about 3 or 4 minutes of their peers talking about what they had just experienced. And that's the world we live in. We live in a world where people are not listening to senior leaders telling them what's good. They're not responding to evangelism. They're responding to TikTok and YouTube and Twitter X. That's the communication model that I think is required today. People want to hear from their peers the unfiltered truth of what's happening, the good, bad, and the indifferent. And we were very transparent. We were very fortunate. We didn't have very many negative reviews, but to the extent that people had experienced some issues or some difficulties, that was part of the story too. And what was our response going to be? How are we going to change the program to respond to these difficulties? That becomes part of what you communicate. So we adopted, and what I think the TLDR on your question is, the stories have to be authentically coming from the peers of all those disgruntled employees, and they have to be authentic.
And as we continue to look ahead, what do you hope businesses and government leaders will take away from your book? Again, Irresistible Change, out in November. If anyone that picks that book up, what do you want them to take away, especially as they face the next wave of transformation and especially those driven by AI and new work models? There's so much change going on at the moment. What do you want people to walk away from this book with?
Well, I want them to walk away thinking they need to buy another 25 copies for their team. Let's be real. Really, the animating idea is we need to shift the responsibility for people not responding. It's not that people don't get it. It's that you're not delivering value. That's the big idea. In the book, I talk about all the tactics from, how do you think about branding the program, which is hugely important? How do you think about building the leadership team, which is not the way most transformations are run? Most transformation puts the subject matter expert or the tool expert in charge. That person has a role to play, more like a CTO in a startup, but it's not the CEO of the effort. I talk about how do you think about the initial teams that you bring in, because that's a very strategic choice. How do you, I think one of the things in transformations that is most often misunderstood, and it comes from what I think is the seminal work for change management, was John Cotter's work called Leading Change back in the 90s. And one of his things was you need quick wins. Well, that's true, but the way people define win is typically wrong. And I talk about that in my book. So how do you think about that initial team selection so that you get the right wins for the program? I talk about the role of communications. So there's a lot of tactics that I think, I certainly want people to understand, but the big idea is if people aren't responding to the change that you want them to adopt, it's probably not them. It's probably that you're not showing the value of the change to their life. And that's on you.
And I think that's a powerful moment to end on. Now, we have a Amazon wish list here that I asked my guests to add a book to. I'm going to add your book to that wish list. I think it will be beneficial for so many people that listen to this podcast. Now, but we also have a Spotify playlist where I ask my guests to leave a song that they can add to that playlist. Guilty pleasures are allowed, but what are you listening to at the moment? What would you like to add to that list?
I'll tell you, it's actually a whole album. It's kind of a thematic album, but the thing that's been on my turntable kind of nonstop for the last several weeks is the Waterboys' new album called Life, Death, and Dennis Hopper, and it is fantastic.
Yeah, you cannot go wrong with Mike Scott. Quite a character. I think he's got quite a following on TikTok at the moment, deconstructing songs and everything as well. But yeah, great artist. I will gladly get the best track off that album added to the playlist. And for anybody listening wanting to check out your book, more information on you, how can they connect with you? Where would you like to point everyone listening?
Gilbert.com, GILBERT.com. More than anybody wants to know about me, just enough about the book, and I'd appreciate anybody buying it that wants it. Get two, one for the office, one for the house.
Love it. Well, I'll get all the links added to make it nice and easy for people to find out more information on that. And you, I urge anyone listening, reach out, connect with you. I think there's so many big lessons to be learned here, and I'm going to be checking out the book as well. But just thank you for taking the time to sit down and sharing your story and the story behind the book too. Thank you.
You bet, Neil. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
I think Phil's message cuts through the noise of transformation fatigue. Because if people aren't adopting your vision, it's not their failure. It's yours to make it worth their time. It's yours to make it worth their time. And his product-led approach to change challenges And his product-led approach to change challenges leaders to prove value, not demand compliance. And ultimately, see culture as something designed with intention, not just dictated to from a ivory tower high above. But I love how he broke down culture into people, practices and places. So thanks again to Phil for joining me, and indeed for you for listening. And as you think about your next big change, ask yourself, are you mandating it or are you making it irresistible? Let me know your thoughts. techtalksnetwork.com, and you can send me an audio message or LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. But that is it for today. So thank you for listening as always, and I'll speak with you all again bright and early tomorrow. Bye for now.